In this brief video, I'm going to show you some of the most important photography equipment that I use out in the field. And I'm going to start with the tripod. So I don't use anything too expensive or flash with a tripod. I use a Sirui 2204X. Now this is carbon fiber. It goes to a really good height. It's nice and firm, and it costs about $500, or it did at least a couple of years ago, which was about £400 at the time. Now I got this ahead of other tripods because I like to compose really low down to the ground. But when you do that, you see you have a central column, and this blocks how low you can go. But with this, you can actually remove the central column. So you can bring the legs out and you can get really low down and nothing's going to stop you from doing that. Now, in terms of the ball head, again, I don't do anything too flash. I don't go for a 2,000-pound ball head or a 1,000-pound ball head. Instead, I just go for something very simple, and this is the standard Sirui ball head. So you can tell I'm quite a fan of this particular brand. It's nice and sturdy. It hasn't caused me any problems over the last couple of years, so I highly recommend it. It cost about $100 or about £80. It might be a little bit more expensive now. For camera, well, I don't want to get into the debate about whether or not you need an expensive full-frame camera. There's lots of information online for that. I use a Nikon D800, which is a full-frame, high-end camera. It is very expensive, and the truth is you can get good photos from any camera. You really can. Some of my favorite photos come from my Canon 60D still, and that's a mid-range crop sensor. But this gives me fantastic RAW files, and it's weather sealed, so it's a lot more resilient. I've taken it to various locations where it's got a hammering from the wind or it's been submerged in water, and it's survived all of that. Now, it's up to you. Obviously, we're often limited by our own budget, so if you can't afford something like this, you can definitely get a cheaper camera which will still produce fantastic results. Now for the lens, I go for the Nikon 14-24. This is my primary lens because I love to go wide and close to subjects. Now I have used for my crop sensor cheaper lenses, which are still reasonably expensive. So I used the the Sigma 10-20mm, which was really good. It did a very good job and it did exactly what I wanted. But compared to the 14-24, there's a huge difference in terms of sharpness and chromatic aberration, among other things. So again, I know we're limited by budget, but often with photography gear, especially when it comes to cameras and lenses, you often pay for what you get. And if you can't afford an expensive camera or lens, that's all right. You can still produce some quality images. Again, some of my images that I really still enjoy were from crop sensors and mid-range lenses. So you don't have to get expensive camera gear. Now, my other lens is the 24-70 Nikon lens. And I don't really go any further than this. This is the longest lens that I use. I don't go for anything that's above 70mm because basically I did carry around a 70-200mm lens for a long time, and I used it once in about 2 years. So for me, this particular focal length from 14 to 70, that's probably as far as I like to go for my personal taste. And it's down to your personal taste and how you like to shoot. Now, getting these out the way, let's look at the more practical stuff. Well, I have this, which is a charger for my batteries. And the reason why I use this and not the standard Nikon charger, this is a new MOA charger, and you might be able to get one for your particular camera. It charges via USB. So it has a little mini USB cable there, or a micro USB cable, and you can charge it out in the field. So I have a huge battery pack by Anker. And if my batteries happen to be dead for whatever reason, maybe I forgot to charge them, or maybe I've just been using the camera a lot, I can just put them straight in here and charge them out in the field. But I can't do that with Nikon's standard charger. For my memory cards, I always use SanDisk Extreme Pro 32GB. I've got about 20 of these, and I like to rotate them when I'm shooting. So they're all numbered. When I go out on a shoot, I have number 1 in my camera, and then when I finish, I put number 2 in and number 3. And I never wipe my memory cards. I always keep them stored here, and then I back them up on my computer. But only when I go to my next shoot and I know I've backed up the files in various locations do I actually format the drives, format the cards. Now, the next thing is just standard batteries. I've got about 6 of these that I like to take on location. This is my head torch. Really useful when it's nice and dark. This is a Petzl Now. And the reason why I like this, apart from it being USB chargeable, again, so we can use these portable battery packs, if we turn it on, this is actually a sensor-based headlamp. So if I just put my finger over it, you can see it becomes much brighter. And the reason why I like that is because it conserves battery power. You know, as it's blue hour, or as the light starts to come up or go down, the torch itself decides how bright it needs to be, rather than keeping it on full beam the whole time, which can essentially kill the battery very quickly. So the battery life actually lasts quite a long time with this. Now, we have a choice of remote controls. I always recommend using a remote, because if you're pressing the shutter on the camera, often we move the camera and that can create a blurry image. So we've got two different choices really. We've got a very simple one here, which is about £5 or $5. And all it is just a button that we press and we can lock up like that. So for doing long exposures, we can lock it up for a couple of minutes. Now, this isn't particularly useful. It'll do the job, but since I like to use ND filters, I like to have a timer on my shutter release. So for this one, I can shoot time lapse, I can shoot single exposures or brackets, but I also can choose long exposure, set it to bulb, and just press the button, and that'll leave it open for as long as I need it to be left open. And that was about $20, and it's by a company called Pixel. But there are lots of different remotes for all these cameras, and I'm sure you can find a good one with good reviews on Amazon or whatever site you like to buy your equipment from. Now I have here my ND filter holder, and I have ND filters. Now I'm not going to go into detail about these because we're going to talk about them later in the long exposure video. And I have my cleaning equipment. So everybody needs this while you're on the road. Your cameras usually get filthy, so we need to keep your lenses and camera nice and clean. And finally, for the actual equipment, I use an L bracket, and this is such a fantastic thing. It cost about $90 or about £70. And essentially what this does is when we have our camera and we put it on top of our ball head, we're in landscape mode here. And if we want to switch to portrait mode, it's not just as simple as putting our camera on the side. Instead, we have to loosen the ball head, we lose our composition, and then we have to bring the top of the ball head down and put the camera on the side. And that can destabilize the tripod. So instead, if you get an L bracket or an L plate, you put this on here like this. So when you're in landscape mode, you can just very quickly go to portrait mode, and it only takes a few seconds, and you keep a stable tripod. Now this is from a company called Sunway Photo, and there are lots of different manufacturers who make these L plates, so I'm sure you'll be able to find one for your camera. And finally, I just want to talk about my camera bag. I use a Lowepro 220. It's the ideal size for carrying it on an airplane. I've had no problems with this with all of my equipment, and it's got a very cool tripod holder on the front here and lots of different pockets for memory cards and batteries and torches and things like that. And obviously you've got the separators in the middle here just to separate all your expensive equipment. Now, just one quick tip. When you're traveling abroad, there are lots of countries where unfortunately pickpocketing is a real thing and people get their camera gear stolen all the time. I suggest these little clips here. They're not foolproof, but if you just lock up some of your zips here like this, it's going to deter certain thieves. When they have a lot of other tourists to deal with who don't have these on their bag, this can help. I also, in those situations, like to bring up my rain cover here from the bottom of my bag and just cover it. And that way there's no open zips that any potential thief can get to. So that's it for the camera gear. As you can see, I don't carry a lot of stuff around with me. I don't go for really expensive gadgets. I know you can get a ball head, which is great for panoramas, for about $1,000. A friend of mine, Daniel Chong, showed me his, which is very good. You can get a really Right Stuff tripod for $2,000, which is extremely expensive. It might be worth it. I've never tried it, but I wouldn't go that sort of price for a tripod. And finally, I like to bring my iPhone along, and we're not going to go into too much detail about that now because you're going to see how I use that out in the field.